The regime kills more than 115 civilians in Syria, mostly in Damascus suburbs and Daraa. Turkey decides to transfer many Syrian refugees residing in the capital to other places for safety reasons. And also in the news, Mohammed Morsi and Ibrahimi meet today to discuss the Syrian crisis. Welcome to Orient TV English News Bulletin. The Syrian regime forces killed over 115 civilians today, mostly in Damascus, where the town of Sayyida Zainab was exposed to artillery shelling that targeted many neighborhoods. And military warplanes shelled the towns of Jisrin and Al-Malli in Zamalka at a time when heavy gunfire was heard coming from security checkpoints, while in the city of Douma, sporadic gunfire took place from the state security and other barriers. And in the town of Sabina, the continuous shelling destroyed more than 30 homes until now. Shelling has intensified in the neighborhoods of Al-Qadam, Al-Asali and Al-Hajj Al-Aswad in the capital, Damascus, where activists reported hearing the sounds of violent explosions, heavy fire, and the fall of many casualties. And gunfire was heard in Khalid bin Walid Street and the neighborhoods of Shaghur, Baramke, and Al-Zahira. While violent clashes took place between the regime's army and the Free Syrian Army in most neighborhoods of the capital, like the neighborhood of Tishrin. Meanwhile, heavy shelling rocked the area of Dummar. The local coordination committees have documented yesterday that 167 Syrians were killed, mostly in Damascus and its countryside.
A scene that is not new from the regime's monstrous bombardment on the residential neighborhoods in the capital Damascus and its suburbs. Here, the bombing was not random. In fact, it was deliberate and shown to the whole world. Al-Hajj Al-Aswad, Al-Qadam and Al-Asali neighborhoods did not know calmness since days, having in constant gunfire day after day that reveals new massacres and increases the death toll. Saqba, Jisrin and Douma as well were also under a siege and the bombardment of the regime's warplanes and artillery that targeted schools, buildings and even farms. Meanwhile, the Tishrin neighborhood is witnessing near Berzeh heavy clashes between the Free Army and the regime forces. A military campaign pushed the Syrian Revolution Committees to announce that the neighborhoods of Al-Hajj Al-Aswad, Al-Tadaman and Al-Asali and Spain as troubled cities that need help from international organizations, Syrian immigrants and the opposition councils abroad. The committee warned of possible new massacres from being committed in these areas, such as the recent massacre that occurred lately in various provinces in Syria after being invaded by the regime forces.
احتراق أحد المنازل في مدينة دوما. الله أكبر.
Regime forces and Shabiha militia stormed the town of Ghabarib in Daraa and carried out a campaign of raids and arrests of dozens, as well as burning a number of houses. In the town of Naime, most of the residential neighborhoods were hit by missile strikes, causing the destruction of several houses and wounding dozens of residents.
For the third consecutive day, the regime's monstrous bombing continues on the area of Al-Lajah in eastern Daraa by the regime forces. The monstrous and horrific bombing pushed the coordinating committees of Horan to call the United Nations, the Islamic Councils, and the world for help, and the importance of intervening and taking action immediately to stop massacres from being committed in the area of Al-Lajah, where the regime forces intensified its military troops all around the city in order to invade it and destroy the resistance in any way possible, even if it meant committing massacres against civilians. The reports that were received stated that the regime is intensifying massive troops on the highway of Damascus-Daraa, heading towards the western entrance of the city. Meanwhile, activists reported that the Omari Brigade of the Free Syrian Army retaliated to the regime in the village of Al-Qasr, Qirtaya, and Al-Wardat, which forced the regime forces to stop invading and to start bombing the city from a long distance, causing the destruction of several civilian homes and a complete disconnection of power supply and a shortage of medical tools. The area of Al-Lajah, that was famous in history for its natural lands, will always stay a hassle for the regime forces that is using untraditional weapons in order to destroy it, which raises the fears among activists that a new massacre is approaching soon in the spot of the land.
Over to Aleppo, where intensified shelling of machine guns and warplanes, along with rocket launchers, tore apart the neighborhoods of Al-Zahra, Al-Sha'ar, Al-Idha'a, and Al-Atarib. And regime forces deliberately threw explosive barrels on residential buildings. And violent clashes broke out between the state troops and the Free Syrian Army in most of the neighborhoods, while military warplanes bombed the city of Darat Azza and the towns of Kafr Hamra and Hayyan, targeting several residential neighborhoods amid panic among the residents. Orthodox Armenians in Aleppo have announced that they are not only neutral but also peaceful, indicating that they do not support the armed local committees that were formed by the state to protect the neighborhoods, and they have nothing to do with them. The spokesperson for their community in Aleppo said they want to solve the problem by peaceful means and through dialogue, noting that Armenians are working on securing their security needs and protecting themselves, while disputing parties are fighting among each other. In the meantime, activists reported that shells targeted a number of churches in Aleppo, while the British Daily Telegraph newspaper said that a number of young Christians have joined the regime forces in Aleppo. The government forces continued indiscriminate shelling of neighborhoods in the city of Homs, as bombing renewed on the towns of Talbisa, Al-Qusayr, Al-Hula, and Al-Rastan, where regime artillery targeted the city center near the Consumer Corporation compound, which killed and wounded many. Turkish authorities decided to transfer tens of thousands of Syrians living outside the camps into Turkish cities. The mayor of Antakya said that the decision was made in order to maintain order and protect everyone in Turkey. Meanwhile, statistics stated that some Syrian refugees living in Turkey are residing with their relatives, as the rest have rented apartments in the city of Antakya, in the province of Hatay, next to Syria. Moreover, the local authorities gave a specific deadline for the transition. They also closed a school where over 800 Syrian students are currently learning. Coming up in the bulletin, the regime commits a new massacre in Idlib. Welcome back. You're watching Orient TV English News Bulletin. In Deir ez-Zor, the artillery bombing was renewed on neighborhoods of Jbele and Al-Ba'ajin. Meanwhile, the neighborhood of Al-Kanamat witnessed intensified shelling from the tanks positioned inside the neighborhoods. This was followed with heavy clashes between the regime forces and the Free Syrian Army amid intensive gunfire shooting. Moreover, according to activists, communications and electrical currents were completely cut off from the city of Al-Muhassan for the fourth consecutive day amid a massive shortage of food and medical supplies.
طيارتين يا عرب، هذه الطيارة الأولى.
As a way to hunt down activists of the Syrian revolution, the regime forces burned many forests in Jabhat al-Khashab. The fires also reached wide areas of natural forests, according to civilians who failed to put down the fire. This comes amid a complete absence of firefighters in the deserted areas a few kilometers away from the Golan Heights.
ولا تستطيع الأهالي إخماد النيران.
The regime forces invaded the neighborhoods of Bab Qibli and Hama and carried out arrest campaigns. This comes at a time where the regime spread its tanks and vehicles in the areas of El Brazia. Meanwhile, in the suburbs, helicopters were seen hovering over the skies of Kafr Zita. Moving on to Idlib, where the artillery bombing was intensified on the city of Saraqib and the towns of Jisr al-Shughur. This comes while the military planes of the regime bombed the towns of Kafr Awid and Khan Safra. Moreover, members of the Free Syrian Army were able to down a MiG plane after heavy clashes with the regime forces near a military airport. Activists also stated that many students in the province of Idlib refused to go to school due to the bombing launched by the regime.
With the continuation of the military campaigns and the increasing helicopter and military bombing on the towns and villages of Syria as a way to try and dim down and destroy the revolution, the public demands the massacre against civilians continued to be carried out by the regime on the Syrian land, which was what happened in the village of Kafar Awid in Idlib suburbs. More than 8 people were killed in the massacre here in Kafar Awid. 6 of them were from one family that was killed by the regime's helicopters that bombed the area for an hour, which was concentrated on one area positioned between Kafar Awid and Al-Mawzara. The regime's shells also reached a bakery in the village and destroyed it. It also caused destruction in 20 buildings, at least according to activists. This isn't the first time that the regime forces commit a massacre against civilians in the village, where it killed previously over 100 citizens in a massacre that was described as the most horrific of all.
The Army Chief of Staff, General Martin Dempsey, will be meeting soon and today with the Turkish counterpart Necdet Özel in the Turkish capital of Ankara to discuss the potential risks posed by the conflict in Syria. Dempsey warned of a clear risk to the spread of chemical and biological weapons, in addition to the loss of control over the proliferation of ballistic missiles, describing these risks as threats to the region. The Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi is expected to meet with UN envoy Lakhdar al-Ibrahimi in Cairo today. This comes at a time where the representatives of Egypt, Turkey, Saudi Arabia and Iran are holding meetings to discuss the Egyptian initiative on the Syrian crisis. President Morsi seeks to hear the Ibrahimi on the results of his visit to Syria in order to reach one concept to deal with a crisis that is worsening day by day. The crisis that first needs a political means and to start moving towards achieving the aspirations of the Syrian people, according to Brahimi. Syria expressed deep regret in front of the Human Rights Council of the fact-finding committee's report about human rights violations in Syria, pointing out that the report contains a lot of misled facts and lacks accuracy and objectivity. The UN Commission of Inquiry has confirmed that escalating human rights violations in Syria and called on the Security Council to refer it to the International Criminal Tribunal in The Hague. And at the beginning of the UN Human Rights Council meeting in Geneva, the committee chairman said that in view of the most recent reports, the violations of human rights in Syria have increased in number, frequency and density.
An international justice mechanism.
Human rights situation in Syria. Once again,
in London, dozens of citizens protested in support of the Syrian citizens that are still living under the artillery and rocket bombardment launched by the regime day by day.
Freedom! Now! Freedom! Now!
And also in the Belgian capital, Brussels, another protest came out and condemned the inhumane massacres committed by the regime against civilians and demanded the cessation of violence in Syria.
La solidarité redonne la vie. La différence tue. La solidarité redonne vie. La souffrance tue. La solidarité redonne vie. واحد 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 الشعب السوري واحد. واحد 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 الشعب السوري واحد. Le peuple syrien est un. Le peuple syrien est un. Le peuple syrien est un. واحد 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 الشعب السوري واحد. واحد 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 الشعب السوري واحد.
And before we wrap up, here's another look at today's top stories. The regime kills more than 115 civilians in Syria, mostly in Damascus suburbs and Daraa. Turkey decides to transfer many Syrian refugees residing in the capital to other places for safety reasons. And Mohammed Morsi and Ibrahimi meet today to discuss the Syrian crisis. With this, we end our news bulletin from Orient TV. Thank you for watching.